Namaste and greetings to all. I am Bharatsya from Mumbai Tarun Bharat and Policy Advocacy Research Centre PARC, and you are watching Bharatasya Sangeet Vishwanubandh Yatra, an attempt to trace the Indian classical music and its interrelationship with global music culture. This project is in association with the Culture Ministry of India and the Government of India. India has a rich history of musicological texts, and to know more about it, we have with us Dr. Keshavchaitanya Kunteji sir. I welcome you, sir. So to begin with, I just wanted to ask you that why do you call it Indian art music and not Indian classical music?
Primarily, classical music, this term is associated with Western art music, and as you know, there are several periods in Western music, like Baroque period, classical period, romantic period. So in Western music, this classical music is used as a specific period music. In the classic period, the composers compose in a certain way, and that compositional aspect is considered as classical music.
Okay.
And in that sense, in Indian music, we don't have that kind of periodization.
Okay.
And that's why when anyone from the Western world or non-Indian world thinks about classical music, then he gets a different kind of sense. And that's why we don't use classical music. The other meaning of classical term, something which is very sophisticated, cultured, and so to say that it's belong to a certain class or elites. And even in that sense, I don't believe that Indian music, Raga Sangeet, is it fits into that term, because yes, it is sophisticated, it is cultured, it's very developed, but it does not belongs to a certain class of people or elites.
Okay.
As we know that most of the classical so-called classical musicians, they belong from a different strata of communities across the communities in India, and even the patronage is not just from royal courts.
Right.
So that kind of setup of classicism and romanticism, it doesn't fit in Indian culture.
Right.
And that's why we use the word art music.
Okay.
Because see, there are 6 categories of music, like the first is primitive music, then folk music, and art music. So these 3 are the developmental categories.
Okay.
And mind you, it's not like folk music belongs to the general masses and primitive music is like of primitive tribes. It's not like that.
Okay.
These are the musicological categories.
Okay.
And that's why say primitive music is, we can see it in the very primitive tribes also, and even the discotheque music in urban setup is also primitive music.
Right. Okay.
So primitive music, folk music and art music, these are musicological categories. They have a different kind of musicological meaning. And the rest of 3 categories are developmental. So these were developmental categories. Rest of 3 categories are applied categories.
Okay.
So religious music or devotional music, then popular music, and confluence music.
Okay.
So we think today in terms of this expanse of 6 categories of music, and that's why we call it as art music. And as we know that in Indian art music, or in a way we can use also Raga Sangeet.
Yes.
This term is also good, but it's just about Indian music, because we don't have the concept of Ragatal in other music cultures.
Yes, true.
It's very unique to Indian music. So we can call it as Raga Sangeet.
Okay.
Now, as we know that Indian music has various pranali or paddhati, like systems, Carnatic system, North Indian system, which is we call as Hindustani Raga Sangeet.
Yes.
And similarly, there are other traditions also, like Sopana Sangeetam of Kerala, or Odishi Sangeeta Paddhati is a different tradition. Satriya Sangeet or Manipuri is a different Similarly, we have various musical systems in India, not just Hindustani and Carnatic.
Yes.
And that's why to mention all these music systems which deal with raga tala concept and which are in a way cultured, developed,
Right.
we call them as
Indian
art music.
Thank you, sir. So my next question to you was, what was the geographical expanse of Indian art music?
Yes, today we think about the political boundaries,
Yes.
but art doesn't believe in political boundaries,
True.
and it never believed
Yes,
in that.
never.
And various communities, various cultures share a certain kind of music. Like if we say about Southeast Asian music, then we know that Malaysia, Java, Sumatra, and there is a cluster of countries, modern countries, which share a similar music culture. It is called as gamelan music.
Right.
Now in Indian subcontinent, say from Kabul, Kandahar to today's Pakistan, Kashmir, then northern part of India, eastern part of India, like till Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and even some part of Burma, and in the south till Sri Lanka, this vast area shares music culture in a common ground.
Okay.
And that's why we call as this is a music culture, Indian music culture, which shares some similar ideas. And what are these ideas? Like we think in terms of ragatal, we share a similar kind of compositional forms. We also have we don't have polyphonic music system.
Okay.
Primarily we believe in monophonic music system. Our music is not scored or written music.
Okay.
It's primarily improvisational or elaborative music. So it's not about process, it's not about product oriented music. Like in Western music, they have score sheets, and the composed symphony or any composition is a final product which is presented for the audience.
Yes.
We don't have that kind of system. We have a system in which we elaborate the musical ideas in front of the audience extempore. And so these are some very fundamental concepts of Indian music which are shared in this entire region.
Right. So my next question to you is, according to you, what is the most detailed musicological text in Indian context?
See, we have a great tradition of musicological texts in India, and primarily we talk about Sanskrit musicological texts. Of course, from medieval time we have Persian and Urdu and other regional languages, texts in regional languages like Bangla or Marathi or Gujarati. So there is a huge tradition of musicological texts, and I think that journey begins from Bharata and in a way ends at Bhatkande in modern period. And Bharatanatyam Shastra is a very extensive text. But as we know, it is not just about music. In a way, I think that is a most fundamental text in performing art, Prayoga Kala. Because it talks about dramatics, dance, music, even literature. So it's a fountainhead of performing art thought. But restricting to music, we can say that Sangeet Ratnakar is a most influential text and in a way very widely discussed text. And after Sangeet Ratnakar, most of the texts are in a way formulated on the basis of Ratnakar, or they are like response to Sangeet Ratnakar. So that's why Sangeet Ratnakar of Sharang Deva is most fundamental text which we deal.
Thank you, sir. So, what was the role of this musicological texts in Indian art music tradition? So how they were important to us?
As we know that कला पहले होती है और शास्त्र बाद में आता है. So there is a performance always performance is the first thing to happen, and the codification or the theoretical thought develops after that. So I think the primary role of Shastra or musicology is to codify the performance.
Okay.
So it's been always like that. People have seen the performance, they have heard the performance, they have analyzed the performance, and then they get some kind of rules out of that. So they formulate rules and regulations like how to perform, where to perform, why to perform, etc. And of course, then it goes to a level of philosophy of art or aesthetics. And naturally, the performance is a very interesting thing that it doesn't gets fossilized in a specific time and space. It is always evolving. It's a ever evolving thing. It changes according to time, people, geographical spaces, even performing spaces. It changes, and that's why we find that musicological texts try to deal with the ever evolving nature of the performance. And that's why we can find that if we try to learn what the musicological texts in India have mentioned or discussed, around say every 200 years we get a paradigm shift. Because the performing tradition is changing, it's evolving, it's developing. And the change is not always development, but there are fundamentally changes, and these changes are driven by various sources. Like there are political changes, internal social changes, or regional changes, change in the language we speak. So music has an impact of all these things, and naturally musicological texts try to deal with all these things. So understanding the performance, then making rules and regulation, in a way codifying or making codification of that performance is one part. Then the Shastra or theoreticians try to in a way control the performance. So, आजकल क्या होता है कि किताब में दिया गया या गुरु परंपरा में बताया जाता है कि ये राग ऐसा गाना है या ऐसा बजाना है, तो in a way they try to control the performer. And that's why we see that performers usually have followed the rules and regulations.
So it gives a discipline to the performer. And the art.
But again, then there is third level, that the brilliant performers or who have a very free thought and free spirit, they don't really like to be in that frame of theory. So they try to break that or widen that. And like in modern period, we have artists like Kumar Gandharva or Kishore Amankar, who have in a way remodeled the theory. Now, in the fourth level theory or the Sangeeta Shastra, again remodels that performance into theory. So it's very interesting how the performance and theory goes hand in hand and they impact each other. So the Sangeeta Shastra or theory of music and the musicological text, they have a great contribution to the performing tradition. We have these two traditions and very vibrant traditions in India, Maukik Parampara or Prayoga Parampara and Vidvat Parampara or Likhita Parampara. And so there is a very interesting correlation of both these traditions, and they go hand in hand.
So are there any differences between the Hindustani and Carnatic musicological texts?
As we know that around 13th, 14th century, these two traditions were drifting apart. Before that, there was, we cannot say that there was a single tradition of music, because there were regional music traditions, but still the grammar or we can say rules and regulations or the format was followed in a similar grounds. After that it was bifurcated into Carnatic and Hindustani system. But interestingly, almost no text mentions like this text is about Carnatic music or this is about North Indian music. I think the theoreticians wrote whatever music was in what they were experiencing. Now today we need to decipher that what the text is telling us. Is it deals with Carnatic or Hindustani, and some texts are very much important for both the traditions like Sangeet Ratnakar. Certain texts are primarily limited to Carnatic music, like the text of RamaMatya is primarily talks about Carnatic music, or Srinivasa's text is Carnatic music. Certain texts deal with even the music system that was prevalent in Bengal and Odisha and Mithila region, today's Bihar region, like Shubhankar's text or Damodar's text. These are the texts which were relevant to that region. Even there are certain texts which were relevant to the region of Maharashtra, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. And interestingly, there are some theoreticians who have wrote extensively on multiple music traditions, like Pundarik Vitthal. We have 4 treatises by Pundarik Vitthal, and he deals with multiple musical traditions like South Indian musical tradition, North and Middle Eastern musical tradition, and that's why it's very interesting to understand these texts in today's format.
So, from Bharat Muni to Pandit Bhatkande, so what do you think, what was the progress or what was the journey of this musicological text?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that when we see Bharata, he talks about multiple performing arts. Then this tradition in a way gets restricted to Sangeeta, like Gayan, Vadan, Nritya. So till Sangeet Ratnakar or even till Sangeet Raj, we have discussions about Gayan, Vadan, Nritya. So vocal music, instrumental music and dancing. Then around 13th or 14th century, then there is again a drift, like most of the texts deal just with vocal and instrumental music, and we have a separate tradition of literature on dance. So there are different texts on dancing. Like Abhinay Darpan or Nritya Deepika, Nartan Nirnay. These are the texts on dancing. And the musicological texts just talk about Gayan Vadan. And further going, about 17th century, we have text only focusing on vocal music. And as we know that Bhatkande primarily talks about vocal music and Khayal idiom and Drupada and Khayal idiom. So in a way, this tradition gets shrinked. The original concept of Sangeeta, which means Gayan Vadan Nritya, it gets in a way restricted to vocal music. But again, see, it's very interesting that in British period, in the modern musicology and especially in cultural musicology, again we have got the full expanse like in ancient times. So it's very interesting journey, and as we see the Sanskrit texts, they initially like Dattilam or Brihat Deshi, they talk about Marga Sangeet and Deshi Sangeet. Eventually, I think this Marga Sangeet element gets wiped out, and primarily they talk of Deshi Sangeet after say 14th century. But similarly, the concept of Marga and Deshi also changes. Like earlier, Marga Sangeet was related to ritualism or spiritualism, and Deshi Sangeet was something for people's entertainment. But later, we find that this Margi and Deshi has changed the meaning. Marga Sangeet is rule bound music, so to which we call today as art music is Marga
Marga
Sangeet
Sangeet.
in medieval text, and Deshi Sangeet is popular music
Okay,
or folk
folk
music.
music, right.
So this connotations also change according
Right.
to the time and even how the theoretician perceives it.
Perceive it. So, like Sangeet Natya Shastra talks about so much about bhav and rasa. So, what is the link between bhav and ras with all this musicological text, and how do you find in this text?
Yes, primarily music. What is music now? Music is a self-expression primarily, and secondly, it's communication.
Right.
And in this sense, music has always been used. So even we before Vedic text, if we look into the archaeological evidences from say Indus Valley civilization, what people were doing, like even before that Bhimbetka caves, we have
yeah.
the, so people were expressing through music. So music has a deep connection with human psyche and social expression.
Human emotions.
Yeah, from the beginning.
Right.
But it gets codified into the text, like from Bharata onwards.
Right.
There is a huge discussion on bhava and rasa, and Bharata was the first theoretician to discuss the 8 rasa, ashtarasa,
Right.
and later on people started talking about navarasa.
Navarasa.
And from Bharata, and then later even in Brihadeshi or Sangeet Ratnakar, they have discussed about the emotion or the power of emotive generation in the swaras and the ragas.
Okay.
So, as self-expression or to communicate something through music has been always the thing in our tradition. But interestingly, Bharata talks this in a framework of theatrical experience, because it's primarily talking about the dramatics. So he mentions like you can use certain swaras or certain jatis to emote certain emotions.
Okay.
Later on, Sangeet Ratnakar or other texts keep on saying that you can use the certain swaras and certain ragas for a certain emotion. But now, if you look into the Ragamala painting tradition or in the medieval tradition, this whole Raga Bhava Rasa relation gets changing.
Right.
So I think it's Raga Rasa or Swara Bhav, these connotations are also ever evolving.
Okay.
They are not fixed.
So, apart from a rich Indian music tradition, we also have a very rich Sant Parampara or the Bhakti tradition. So, how did this music, Indian art music, influence or go in flow with the Sant Parampara?
Yeah. I think in the medieval India, the most influential part was this Santa Parampara or Bhakti Parampara. Not just spiritually, socially also. And the message of these saint poets was spread through music. And music was in a way used as a powerful tool for this social, cultural or spiritual, I can say revolt. So most of these saint poets or missionaries were using music for propagation of their message. So in Maharashtra we have the tradition from Sant Dnyaneshwar, or as we know that Sant Namdev was the founder of the Kirtan Parampara here. In Bengal there was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And similarly in every part of India we have such saint poets which use music and rich poetry for this message. Now what the musicians were doing, they were using this text for their expression also. And that's why we find that the art music tradition gives a response to the Bhakti tradition, and they have a very, very nice give and take. Many saint poets were musicians also, like in in Pushti Margi Parampara, Vaishnava Parampara, the Ashtachap Kavi, they were not just Kavi or poets,
Right.
they were musicians, and they composed their padas in Dhrupad style.
Right.
And one of them was Santa Surdas, as we know, or Santa Kumbandas.
Right.
And many of Kumbandas or Surdas or Nandadas's padas are still sung as Dhrupadas.
Right.
So it's a very deeply rooted connection. Even in Maharashtra, Sant Ramdas, he was a musician.
Okay.
He used to sing, dance, and that's why we find references to sargam and dance bowls like Nrityanga bowl,
Right.
or Pakhwaj bowl, which we call as Patakshara. And even some compositions of Ramdas are in form of Chaturanga or Trivat.
Oh.
So these saints were not just saints, they were musicians,
Okay.
and the musicians were not just musicians, they elevated to the level of saints.
Saints.
So
Right.
this Santa Parampara and Sangeeta Parampara is a very
interrelated.
neatly woven tradition.
Yes. So my last question to you is, modernization is a boon, but how is this modernization affecting this tradition, and what do you think, what is the future of this tradition in India?
Primarily, this modern period gave us technology, and technology in a way benefited the traditional arts in India, but it also has a negative side or downside, because see what the technology tries to do, it tries to reduce our efforts. But art is not something to reduce the efforts. You can achieve art with efforts only. There is no shortcut. There is no shortcut. And now, see, when you are tuning your tanpura or your instruments, it's not just tuning the string. You tune yourself. And it's a huge psychological process of you being introvert in your art and then emoting something with your art.
Yes.
Now, when we click a tab and play the electronic tanpura or tabla, this whole process is gone.
Right.
So you are not tuned with yourself.
Yes.
Then how can you think of and you how you can express through your art? And that's why we need to go back to our roots and preserve the tradition in a different way. Yes, I'm not saying that you need to use the old instrument as they are used, but you need to think the technology in the traditional sense, and you need to think the tradition in a modern technological sense. Then only we can get a balance with the tradition and technology. And as we know that instrument making is a very difficult task today. There are even very different kind of problems or issues we are facing, ecological issues, like for making instruments we need animal skin.
True.
Now it is forbidden.
Yes.
So people are coming with artificial material, then the tone of the instrument is lost. So there are several such issues, but we need to deal with all these issues and then try to revive the tradition in a different way. So primarily the modern technology has given us various kind of tools to negotiate with the tradition, but we have to think positively about that.
Thank you so much, sir. So it was indeed an insightful conversation. We knew so much. We were not knowing anything about musicological texts, and it was an amazing experience to get acquainted with all these facts from a renowned ethnomusicologist like you. So it was our privilege to have you with us. Thank you so much, sir.